Greetings, Helldivers. Ervin here to bring you everything you need to know about constellations and Helldivers 2. To get right into things, what is a constellation, you may be wondering, and with good reason. To no one's surprise, it's a mechanic completely undocumented within the game itself that's only ever made one appearance briefly within the patch notes long, long ago. Constellations are functionally an enemy pattern or seed that determines which enemy types are able to spawn and how often those enemies will appear. One of the greatest examples of this in action is the Biospewer. You've likely noticed during your Helldiving career, this enemy has a tendency to appear in vast quantities or not at all. That is because they belong to just one constellation nicknamed Bugs for ease of reference going forward, but we'll cover them in more detail later. These constellations not only determine unique enemy spawns, but also shift the number of certain enemy types you encounter. You've likely noticed when fighting the Jumpy Bug constellation, you're swarmed with hundreds of hunters and pouncers constantly. But sometimes you'll instead see very few hunters, instead replaced with tons of hive guards and other armored bugs instead. All of this is determined by constellations and which one you are currently combating. So, if it's not random, how can you tell which constellation you'll be combating on the loadout screen? Well, it's based entirely on the mission that you're currently deploying to. Launch ICBM, for example, has a 100% chance for you to combat the Bile Bugs constellation, an enemy seed that spawns an increased number of spore chargers as well as bile scavengers, bile warriors, and of course, the bile spewer, increasing the value of medium penetrating and explosive weaponry quite substantially when playing this mission type, as they are much better suited to performing against bile spewer swarms. For the automaton front, ICBM is always populated by the Rushdown constellation. This automaton constellation is made up of a majority of berserkers and Hulk scorchers, hence the name, meaning loadouts should be tailored to dealing with close encounters, sporting high DPS area of effect or crowd control to better handle waves of berserkers. There are, however, different weights to the constellations when it comes to defensive campaigns, where these constellations might not always be accurate, instead defaulting to any of the other possible constellation options. So keep that in mind that this will only be 100% accurate during offensive operations. The retrieve valuable data as a mission type will always be either the Bile Bug constellation or the Big Bug constellation. The Big Bug constellation is made up of an abnormally high number of hive guards, as well as many heavy units involving an overall high number of chargers, impalers, and titans, putting an emphasis on anti tank class weaponry within your team's loadouts, as there is still a 50% chance of this instead being the Bilebug constellation. You still have every reason to load out with medium armor penetrating primaries and explosive weaponry, as these will still function extremely well against high volumes of hive guards. Just be sure to pack some extra anti tank options, and you'll always be in for a smooth operation when it comes to this mission. With the automatons, in regards to retrieve valuable data, it will either be the Rushdown, as we've already covered, or the Bullet Hell constellation. The Bullet Hell constellation is what it sounds like. The vast majority of troopers are MG raiders. The majority of Hulks are bruisers equipped with cannons and rockets. And the vast majority of the Devastator spawns are of the heavy variety, meaning you have an abnormally high amount of incoming laser fire to contend with. Unlike with the Terminids, when facing the bots during the Retrieve Valuable Data mission, it's much more difficult to plan your loadouts for a Rushdown or Bullet Hell, as they are complete opposites in regards to what you'll be facing. Either very close quarters oriented or extremely laser and projectile focused. Weapons that can handle devastators in large numbers as well as berserkers are ideal, as well as weapons that can handle hulks in large numbers, whether they be bruisers or flamers, are ideal. Thankfully, most top running options against the automatons function equally well against berserker swarms or devastator swarms, and all hulks can be eliminated by the same exact weapons. Generally, the best options will be top running primaries like the Plasma Purifier, Crossbow, or DCS, while support weapons like the Railgun, AMR, and Autocannon will also see a lot of mileage against either of the constellations that may appear. When it comes to emergency evacuation, geological survey, and spread democracy, these objectives will either have you encountering the Big Bugs constellation or the Bug Nursery constellation. The Bug Nursery constellation is basically just a weaker variant of the Bile Bugs, with the majority of its forces made up of the weaker nursing spewers, scavengers, and overall a higher amount of chargers. Considering both Big Bugs and the Bug Nursery constellation both sport a higher volume of heavy units, it's a good idea to bring a higher variety of anti tank options within your loadouts for these three missions to cover both potential constellations well. Explosive weaponry in particular also completely shuts down nursing spewers as well as weapons with high overall durable damage in a similar fashion to biobugs. This makes these three missions overall some of the easiest due to the predictability in the enemy variety and overall ease of the enemies that you'll be facing on average. For the automatons, this is not nearly as true. You will potentially face off against the Big Bot constellation. This spawn set includes a majority distribution of Scout Striders or Rocket Striders, depending on your difficulty, making it one of the most difficult to combat on difficulty 10 right off the bat due to the general power this unit has. In addition, you'll be fighting a high volume of factory striders, commonly referred to as dogs, as well as tanks in all variants. The other potential constellation, the foot soldiers, is the exact opposite. Yet again, made up of a majority of rocket devastators as well as Hulk bruisers for a very high volume of small rockets coming at you. However, enemies larger than Hulk, such as tanks and factory striders, are extremely rare, as you'll either be dealing with a high volume of big bots with their constellation, or the exact opposite, potentially with the foot soldiers constellation. This again makes the automatons much more difficult to plan for when it comes to these three mission types. I would, however, argue it's a good idea to bring a primary weapon that handles rocket striders particularly well, such as the DCS or crossbow, or the Senator with its two tapping capabilities to the crotch plate. Any of these three weapons are going to perform well on either constellation, making them ideal choices for both the Rocket Devastator or the Rocket Strider, depending on which one you need to deal with. For your support weapon, an anti tank weapon like the Quasar Cannon, Commando, or Recoilless Rifle is going to be your best option, depending on if you want to spend your backpack slot or not, as these will serve you well when dealing with the Hulks in the Foot Soldier constellation or the heavy amount of tanks and factory striders in the Big Bots constellation. Getting into the unique mission types next, the Purge hatcheries enable E710 extraction and nuke nursery objectives, which are all unique to the Terminid front, only can either put you up against the Big Bug constellation or the dreaded Jumpy Bugs constellation. In the Jumpy Bug constellation, the majority of the enemy's spawning budget is spent on hunters and prowlers, enemies that close distance quickly and swarm in great numbers with a low spawn rate for tank class bugs and medium bugs, although there are still notably quite a few titans walking around. Due to these missions always being either the Big Bug constellation or the Jumpy Bugs, you'll want your primary to be your comfort pick for dealing with masses of hunters, while your support weapon is best utilized as a contingency in case you'll be dealing with a high variety of tank class bugs during a Big Bugs map. This ensures that you're ready for anything and able to handle large swarms of hunters or large amounts of tank bugs, effectively countering either of the potential constellations with just one loadout. Now, when it comes to the mission objectives unique to the automatons, sabotage airbase, destroy command bunkers, and neutralize orbital defenses, you will be up against either the Bullet Hell constellation or the Big Bots constellation. This means your primary weapon should be your comfort pick for handling both high volumes of heavy devastators and rocket striders, countering either potential constellation, as well as a strong anti tank support weapon in the case that you're up against the Big Bots constellation, providing you with a strong option against either potential spawn set. Now, with the last three mission types that appear on either front, that being Blitz, Eradicate, or Evacuate high value assets, they have absolutely no rules in regards to constellations. These three missions can be any of the available constellations, but due to them all being very different in theme and objective, they are, in my opinion, much less about what enemies you are against and more about the stratagems and tactics best suited to clearing the missions itself. For example, Bug Blitz, the Emancipator Exo is particularly useful, since the mission isn't likely to last much longer than your 2 exosuit call ins and its ability to decimate large volumes of bug holes. Against the automatons, jetpacking around with the quasar cannon and the strafing run stratagem allows your Helldiver to extremely quickly remove every fabricator on the map. And given that low mission duration, something you definitely need to take into account with your loadouts. Eradicate and Evacuates are essentially just defensive kill farms when your loadout is tailored entirely to being combat efficient above all else, making it much easier to craft a loadout and more so a team that is able to handle any and all incoming threats, regardless of what they are, making the randomness involved in the seeding of your constellation far less of an overall issue. Now, everything we've covered thus far is actually just the basics of how the system works. The constellation system always favors two specific groups based on the mission, except in the case of defense, this much is true. But the chances are only ever zero for bile bugs and nursing bugs during some missions. Luckily, fellow content creator Clay Aesthetics has made these helpful charts made from documenting all of his games since the dawn of time to display a much broader assortment of potential constellations and include the randomness that occurs within defensive operations. Although you can see the naming conventions for the constellations are not the same as the ones I've presented thus far, there is a key, and you can work out which are which based on what we've talked about thus far. I'll leave a link to his channel as he is also planning a video on this exact same subject, but it will likely go into even greater detail than this one, making a great watch following up after finishing this video. If you want a clean, simplistic graphic that only takes into account the basics instead, we also have these convenient cards made by Mercy in our Discord that you can share around as well. Lastly, there is the new sub faction system to account for. As you know, we've been under attack for some time now by the Jet Brigade, which in a lot of ways mirrors the Rushdown Constellation, bringing a large number of Flamer Hulks, Berserkers, and Troopers, except all of the Troopers are replaced with jump packing variants. Without getting into leaks like I did in my other recent video where I talked about another upcoming sub faction, as well as new enemies coming soon to the game, this system exists outside the Constellation system. You're told you'll be up against them on the galactic map, and they replace any other constellation that would have otherwise been active. Whether this exists to eventually replace the Constellation system with something more readily apparent to the player in game or not is yet to be seen, but that's pretty much the gist of how it works for now. Now, that is going to do it for my rundown on how constellations work and how you can best prepare yourself for the potential threats that you'll be encountering within your missions, depending on what constellation may currently be active, as far as what mission you are currently on. In addition, I'll also be leaving a link in the description to an extremely well made, similar written guide by Halibut HD in case you want another angle on the subject. As always, we also have any and all information related to the subject pinned within my community Discord, the Ghost Divers, found below as well. I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you to my coffee supporters for helping to keep the channel alive, and thank you for watching till the end. I'll see you next time. Well, I mean, I have to, right?